Great. Thank you so much. There it is. Appreciate that, Eric. Appreciate you asking me to share at this meeting and for this opportunity to be of service, and Derek and everyone else being of service to this meeting. And yes, I am in Bali, Indonesia. And I don't know if you can hear it in the background or not, but this is a Hindu island here on an archipelago of 10,000 islands, the majority of which are Muslim, and it's a Muslim holiday. We're Monday, we're a day ahead of you. Yesterday was Father's Day, today it's a Muslim holiday, and they're singing and praying in the background. So if you hear that in the background, that's what that is. But anyway, my name's JM. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. Yes, I have been through the steps as they're laid out in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous with a very patient sponsor, a loving God. I've done almost all my amends, and I live in 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. So yes, I have worked the Big Book step study process. I'm qualified to share in those meetings, and have had a radical spiritual experience as a result of that, which I'll share with you. But first, I'll just give you a little rundown on how I qualified to be here. I won't spend too much time on it, but just want to give you a little background. I come from a family with a long history of alcoholism and addiction. It's pretty much landed on every branch of the family tree. Childhood that included abuse of many kinds, which, led me to alcohol at a really early age. Started drinking at 9 or 10. Parents took me to a party with their friends, and first experience with alcohol, I got so drunk I had to be carried out of the party. Next time I was vomiting. I was a daily, the first time I smoked weed, the guy that I was smoking with said, "Have you ever done coke?" I said, "No." He's like, "Well, you have now." And he showed me that he put a little coke on the pipe. That was age 11. By 12, I was a daily drinker and drug user. For me, I was definitely the Jekyll and Hyde type of drinker. The consequences mounted very quickly for me. I ended up in jail about the same time, 12. And then that was all in California. And then at about the age of 14, my mom moved us back to Wisconsin, where she had grown up. And I was out at a party, and I was getting drunk. I think I was a freshman in high school. And I had to be home by midnight. And I asked the guy at the party if he'd give me a ride home. And he said, yeah. We were both underage. He gave me a ride halfway home on a ATV 4-wheel vehicle. And this was Wisconsin. And we lived out in the country. And it was a blizzardy night. Like when I had left for that party earlier in the evening, there was no snow, nothing. It was a little chilly. I had a little sweater on and some tennis shoes and jeans. But by the end of the party, X number of hours later, it was full scale, sideways blowing blizzard. And he could only take me halfway home, and I started walking. I said, "No problem, I can walk the other half." And I started walking. And, after walking a couple miles, I started getting really, really cold. And it was the first time in my life that I thought I was facing death. I was pretty sure I was going to die if I didn't get some help. And like I said, we lived out in the country. The whole time I'd been walking, I hadn't passed a house, no cars had passed me, and I started getting numbness in my fingers and toes. And I knew that was the onset of frostbite. So I knew I didn't have too long, or so I thought. And I was an atheist up to that point. I used to argue with people that there was no God. If Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons would come over, I would invite them into the house and, argue with them that there was no God. But facing death for the first time, I thought, this would be a good time to find out. And, the William James Varieties of Religious Experience that Bill references, that's what they talk about. Usually people have to be in pretty dire circumstances. Even the staunch atheist in the direst of circumstances will reach out to God. And I did. And I'd been to church a couple times, so I did what I saw, and I went down on my knees, put my hands together, and I said, "God, if you're out there, please just get me home safely tonight. I promise I'll always love you and I'll always believe in you." And I got up and started taking some steps, and I was enveloped in this white light. And I thought, wow, this prayer thing's pretty powerful. I should have started this long ago. And then all of a sudden I heard this horn honk, beep, beep. And I turned around, and it was these two girls that I had just met at the party that pulled over and opened the door and said, "What are you doing out here? You're gonna die. Get in." And I jumped in the back of their car and I started telling them, "You're never gonna believe what happened. I just prayed to God and you guys came." And these two girls looked at each other like, "Man, these guys in California are nuts." But that opened the door for me a crack. Yeah, I went from an atheist to a believer immediately. And that was kind of my Winchester White Light Cathedral moment where, I knew there was a higher power, but that knowledge alone wasn't enough. God had to come at me in a strong way. He had to make his presence known for me to believe. But it didn't stop me from drinking. I continued, I carried on and drank more than another 10 years. By the time I was 14, I finally went to live with my dad. He ended up in prison shortly thereafter for 12 years, and my alcoholism and drug use really escalated. By the age of 17, I was in juvenile hall. I got sentenced to a year, but got out in 6 months on good behavior. While I was in there, they gave me, put me on probation, gave me another charge, a felony. I got out, I tried to go to college. I didn't understand the nature of alcoholism and drug addiction. I thought I could drink moderately in college. I couldn't. Only ended up going to 3 classes that first semester, had an acid flashback, ended up trying to steal a car, then a bike, ended up back in jail, facing a mandatory 5 years in prison for violating probation. That scared me. That was one of the worst bottoms of my life. I was in San Luis Obispo County jail, just struggling, just like going out of my mind, having the DTs, hearing audio hallucinations, visual hallucinations. I thought the guards were going to kill me. It was horrible. When I got out from jail, I got one last chance by my probation officer, let me out. And I stayed sober on fear, just like Bill talks about in his story. I stayed sober in fear for quite some time too. I went to college. I did well as long as I wasn't drinking and using drugs. I graduated with honors, made the dean's list, did quite well. But then, I fell prey to a common notion that someday I could drink like a normal man. And when I got out, I thought I was a little older, a little more mature. I could drink a little more responsibly. And I started having some beers, and it wasn't long before it was daily usage and I was back in jail. That was 1997. I ended up in jail with a DUI. And I went to an outpatient treatment program, and I haven't had a drink or a drug since then. But when I was in that outpatient treatment program, there were about a dozen people in there. And, we were towards the end of the program, and I showed up one day and everyone in that program was kind of giddy and giggling. And I was like, "Hey, what's going on, guys?" The counselor wasn't there yet. And they said, "Well, the program's almost over. We went out last night and celebrated and got drunk." And I was like, "What? You got to be kidding me." Like, they all had a different drug of choice. One was Vicodin, one was, cocaine, one was something else. And they just didn't get that you couldn't do anything. And I'd already learned that lesson through my many jail experiences. So I said, I just thought, these programs don't work. So I didn't go to any program. I didn't go to 12-step recovery. I just stayed sober for the first 12 years, white knuckle sobriety. And, I definitely was not experiencing the miracles. I didn't end up in jail, which was fortunate. It was the drugs and alcohol that fast tracked me into jail. But I was about 12 years sober. I was living in Bali. On the surface, I had a perfect life. I was, married to a beautiful Balinese woman. We had a young son together. I was working at a job, making more money than I'd ever made before. I was surfing whenever I wanted. I had just built a house with cash, no mortgage. But inside I was broken, like something was wrong. I was spiritually bankrupt. I was losing my mind. I had anxiety. And I started getting those first, when I drink and use drugs, like, I lose the capacity to control my mind. Yeah. My mind just takes on a life of its own. And I always said, if that ever happens and I'm not drinking and using drugs, I may as well drink and use drugs. And when that thought occurred to me, I got scared, because living in Bali, Indonesia, I didn't want to end up in a jail or a psychiatric institution here. So the only thing I could think of was AA. My dad was in AA, and he introduced that to me when I was young. So I went to AA and, just did what I was told to do. It was open AA. I got a sponsor. I worked the steps. I did service. And you know, I got marginally better, but what I discovered during the course of that is that when I got to 6 and 7, is I discovered I was a sex and love addict. I just had no idea what that even was. So then I tried to face that. I thought, well, this isn't alcohol and drugs. I don't need AA anymore. So I started going to S fellowships, SLA, SA, SAA, etc. I spent another 12 years trying to get a handle on sex and love addiction. It was brutal. It was like I worked a rigorous program too. I did the SLA program. I was making 3 calls a day. I called my sponsor every day. I did step work every day. I went to minimum 3, 4 meetings a week, and I couldn't stay sober. I'd stay sober for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. I got 6 months a couple times. I got 9 months one time, but I always slipped. I always went back, and I just didn't know what the hell happened. Well, at one point I was in active addiction, in my sex and love addiction. And, I wanted to keep one foot in recovery. So we always do these outreach calls, and I kept talking to this guy. He was a neurosurgeon in the UK, and he was like me. He was the hopeless variety. He just couldn't stay sober either. He worked a more diligent program than me, and he couldn't stay sober either. And one day I just noticed something changed in him. There was a miraculous change that I could not explain. He just came to life, and he started sharing with depth and weight. I'm like, what's going on with this guy? He's like, I got this new sponsor, and he's great. He's taking me through the big book of AA, and I'm staying sober. And I was like, wow, this is miraculous. And it kind of dovetailed with me hitting another bottom. I was 24 years sober from drugs and alcohol, and I hit a bottom in my sex and love addiction. I was discovered. My wife left me. My son wouldn't talk to me. I lost my house, lost my money, was working a dead end job. I mean, I just came to a complete bottom. I'm like, I can't go on like this anymore. Nothing I'm doing is working. And at that time, this guy who came to life that I was outreaching with said, hey, you want to talk to my sponsor? So I said, yeah, I do. I need help, and I don't know what else to do. And I called this sponsor up, and it was David G from Oklahoma. Maybe some of you have heard him share. And just talking to him, I knew something was different about his approach. And I wanted it. I wanted it bad. And I was finally at the point. I've had many sponsors before that say, hey, anything you put above your recovery, you risk losing. And I used to make it, what about my job? Come on, I gotta make money to provide for my family. What about my son? I've got to, take care of him and everything else. I always had these excuses. Well, what they said was true. I lost it all. So I finally got to that point of willingness where I was willing to go to any length. And my sponsor, when he did the interview process, said that to me. He's like, are you really done? Do you really want this? I said, yes, definitely. He's like, are you willing to go to any length? I said, yeah. He said, remember, being willing to go to any length means being willing to go to any length. So I took every suggestion he gave me. I was at the end of the road. I had nowhere else to go. I'd been through every other fellowship I could find. I couldn't stay sober in any of them. And I started having a spiritual experience almost immediately. But he did things a little bit differently because most of the people he worked with were also sex addicts. He started us on. He asked me, he's like, well, you've been in AA for 12 years now. You've been sober for 24. Are you doing 10 and 11 on a daily basis? I'm like, no. He's like, well, you need to start there. So he put me onto the 10th step. And, we read it out of the book. It's on page 84. So he took me to the 10th step, and he said, basically, you're gonna start checking these things in with me every day. Continue to, take personal inventory. It's step 4. It's the reworking of all steps in one step. He said, so we got to look for any new mistake that comes up. And so throughout the day, as I go through my day, I look for, dishonesty, fear, resentment. We add lust to that. And when those crop up, doesn't say if, it says when those crop up, we ask God immediately to remove them. So I'd ask God to remove them. And then I shared it with someone else. That's the 5th step. And then we do it in a WhatsApp group. We send WhatsApps to each other when we spot these things to share, and then turn my thoughts to helping someone. I don't actually have to help them. I just have to turn my thoughts to helping someone. And I started doing that on a regular basis, and things were coming up regularly. Like, I was getting 20 to 30 of these cropping up every day. And I just share them in the WhatsApp group. And every time I did, it just diffused it a little bit. And somehow I I didn't act out. You know, I was able to stop acting out. I haven't acted out since then. It's been, you know, almost over a year and a half now. It's something I could never have accomplished on my own. And then, of course, in the 11th step, he had me do the Upon Awakening every day, and we do a nightly review at the end of the day, and I share that with my sponsor via email. And then he just, you know, took me back to the beginning of the book, read me through the doctor's opinion in the first 3 chapters on step 1 in a way that I'd never experienced before. And I really had a true first step experience. He really made sure to explain to me the twofold nature of the illness, the obsession of the mind, which, you know, leads to the first drink, the first drug, the first whatever. And then once that occurs, it's in my body and it triggers the phenomena of craving. And once the phenomena of craving is triggered, I just can't stop. And it's not just, you know, drugs and alcohol. It's not just sex and love. It's coffee, it's nicotine, it's exercise, it's anything. You know, I can trigger this phenomena of craving in many different ways. In fact, I had to stop drinking coffee too. I couldn't stop drinking coffee. And you know, he always reiterated through the whole process. He introduced me to the concept of self and how that defeated me, as it's described in the 3rd step, just prior to taking the 3rd step. And what he showed me is that, you know, it says selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root cause of our problems. The alcohol, the drugs, the food, the sex, the whatever. These are just symptoms, manifestations of the underlying illness. The illness, the real illness, the root of it is selfish self-centeredness. So I had to stop being selfish and self-centered. And that's where the 10th step really worked, because I could start turning my thoughts to helping other people. And what happens over time is I'm reconditioning the mind, coming away from that selfish self-centeredness, all those character defects that I live in, towards helping other people. So eventually I'm going to take an action on what I'm thinking about, right? And if I'm thinking about how poor me, all my self-pity, all the things that are going wrong, you know, I'm going to keep acting in those cycles of addiction that keep me, you know, entrenched in the muck and mire of alcoholism. But if I'm turning my thoughts constantly to helping other people, eventually I'm going to start helping other people. It's a reconditioning process that happens with that 10th step. And one of the things he explains is that, you know, I've got this storyline, this narrative that plays in my head. And that's what self is, right? It judges people. It's very emotional. It's the intellect, it's the ideas, it's the thoughts, it's all these things that tell me stories about the greater world around me and the people around me, and puts me at odds with them, and has me creating stories about each and every person in my life, and hold on to the resentments I feel towards them. And you know, it uses that as an excuse and a justification to keep on drinking, to keep on using drugs, to keep on acting out in all these various different ways. So I had to break that cycle. And that's really what this work did for me. So once I really fully understood and comprehended the nature of the illness, and how I just couldn't take that first drink, you know, we got to chapter 4, we agnostics. And, you know, even though I'd had that white light spiritual experience, it hadn't really taken hold. I had faith, but faith without works is dead, right? So I had to do work, right? I had to do work. Work is how I build that bridge to a relationship with God. So, you know, it starts out in We Agnostics on page 44. And, you know, in that first paragraph, he said, turn these into questions. When you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. You know, is that true? Yeah, of course, that's true with drugs, alcohol, sex, love, all these things. If when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, is that true? Yes, that's true. Well, then you're probably an alcoholic, okay? In which case you are suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Okay, and for me, I was the hopeless variety, so I had 2 choices. I could either be doomed to an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis, right? And it says these are not always easy alternatives to face for an alcoholic. They should be, but they aren't. And, you know, I spent 24 years evading it. And then on the following page, page 45, it says lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. But where and how? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problems, all your problems, not just the drink problem, not just the drug problem, all problems. Yeah. So, and that's really what it was about, because prior to this, I did a lot of intellectualizing. I read a lot of books on spirituality. I studied religion in college. I was, became a Christian when I was in jail. I was introduced by a Native American that came preaching there. I went to a lot of different denominations of Christianity, tried to find the right one. I became a Hindu when I married my Balinese wife. I found my way back into Christianity. I've been to Buddhist meditations. I tried everything. I could tell you a theory about what God was, but I couldn't apply it in my life. This book, this is the solution to all of our problems, especially the drink and drug problem and any other addiction that we have. So I really knuckled into this and really, went into it. And then on page 46, it talks about he also showed me something I hadn't discovered. He showed me this book in a whole new way. This book is written, it's an instruction manual, not just how to stay sober, but how to have a life-affecting spiritual experience, then carry that message to the alcoholic that still suffers. That's the solution. That's how we get out of this dilemma. So he showed me in this chapter, We Agnostics, which I'd been reading for 12 years up to that point, that there's 3 exercises in here that I didn't even know about it. The first one's on page 46. It's called the reflection exercise, where Bill's talking about how, at moments we found ourselves thinking when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was that feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost, right? That's the problem. It was fleeting and soon lost. So we've all had these moments where we've got that connection, that we're in the presence of some force, some spirit, some higher power, God, whatever it is, but it's fleeting and soon lost. He showed me that that's the self. That's where the imposition of self comes back in. That's where my mind takes me away from that connectedness to God. And he told a story about a time where he had an experience like that. And he had me tell one of my own. And I do that with my sponsees too. So you can break the ice, crack the mold a little bit, show them that, yeah, there have been times in your life where you have had that connection to God. You just was fleeting and lost. You need to find it again. So that's the first exercise. And then the next exercise is on the following page, page 47. And that's the first action. It's a written exercise. And this is called the spiritual terms exercise, where he had me write down all the spiritual terms, my preconceived notions of God, Jesus, the devil, hell, the Holy Ghost, whatever, and then write what it meant to me and what I want it to mean. What my new conception is, what I want that to mean to me today. So I had to see what was holding me back, right? Bill talks about in his story how his grandfather and his good-natured contempt for religious folks helped plant the seeds for what he thought about spirituality and God. So this is what this does. This helps me see, where did my foundation come from? Because whatever I had, whatever my belief was, even though I knew there was a God, it wasn't working. This belief wasn't working. So I had to develop a relationship with my higher power. So I had to get rid of these preconceived notions that I had. And then the final exercise in the book is on page 52, the bedevilments. And he pointed out to me that these bedevilments were we having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We're prey to misery. If we're prey, what does that mean? That means there's a predator out there. Who's the predator? The self. It's the self. It's the ego. It's the stories I tell myself in my own mind. Yeah. And he's like, we can be plagued by these bedevilments, drunk or sober. And basically, I had to admit, I was 24 years sober, and like I was plagued with these bedevilments. Like something was wrong. I had a real white light experience as a result of this. And then also right after I did my bedevilments exercise, for sex addicts, he took us into the sex addicts book, Step into Action. And there's a powerful people exercise that they do in there in step 2, which is similar to the spiritual terms. And it helps you to see where the foundation of your spiritual beliefs come from. And then we went into read how it works. And yeah. And then when we got to page 60 and 61, and it talks about how we are like an actor who wants to run the whole show. It doesn't say we are an actor. It says we are like an actor. So if we're not the actor, we're not the director, who is? And once again, David pointed out to me, it's the self. It's that selfish self-centeredness, that self-centered thinking, that storyline narrative that plays in my head, that thing that puts me at odds with everything and everyone in the rest of the world. So, he pointed it out in there. It says, if his arrangements, whose arrangements, not mine, his self, would only stay put, if only people do as he wished. Who's he? It's not me, it's self. The show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. Uh, he may be kind, considerate, patient. It's all he, it's all self. It's not me. The problem is, I think it is. I'm being directed by something else. That other thing is self. So, something has to happen here. I have to have a complete change in the way I approach life. I don't have to just believe in God. I have to turn my whole will and life over to the care of this power greater than myself. Because up to this point, 50 years into my life, with all the knowledge I had of religion and God and all the stories I could tell you about it, my life was completely out of sorts. Nothing was working. It didn't work. My beliefs didn't work. So, I sat down, did an honest third step prayer, and that opened the body of work for 4 through 7. So, he also pointed out to me that at the end of the third step prayer, there's no amen. That's an open-ended prayer. So I say that prayer through the whole process of my 4-step inventory, right? So he told me whenever he put me on the 4-step inventory, he said, you start with the third step prayer, you ask God to show you the truth, and you write, and you just let it flow. You let the spirit move through you and let it flow off your pen. And then, that's what I did. I stayed prayerful through that whole body of work. So, and then, and step 4, just the mechanics of it, I did it exactly as it's outlined. Like I said before, this book is not just a good read. This book is an instruction manual. When they wrote this book, the intention was for the first 100 alcoholics. They knew there were alcoholics suffering all over the world. They knew the 100 that they had in the Midwest and Northeast of the United States couldn't reach them all. So they figured, we'll write this book. We can send it out all over the world, and people can find this book and just start working these steps and have this spiritual experience and start these little fellowships. So this was meant to be an instruction manual. And when I worked it through with my big book step study sponsored, I really saw it. He would stop me at every line and show me the instruction, and there's a lot of prayers and a lot of promises in here. But as it relates to the inventory, it says resentment is the #1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. So, I really had to look at this. So it said we set them on paper. So he just had me make a list, right? It says we listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. So I did that. Bum, 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 bum. Wrote a list of like 300 plus names. And then, the second column, we asked ourselves, why are we angry? So I did that. This guy's a jerk. She's a jerk. He's a jerk. Wrote why I was angry. And it was easy. That was easy. That part was really easy. But I got about midway through that list, and I was writing about this kid I knew, in middle school. And I wrote all the things, all the reasons he made me angry. And I just had this epiphany. I looked at it and I'm like, wait a minute here. Every single thing I'm angry about that this kid did, I have in myself. I've done myself. And then whoosh, the whole list opened up. I'm like, wow, this is all me. It's not them at all. It's all me. I am projecting these things I have inside of me that are unlike, that I dislike about myself. I project them onto other people. And then when it's mirrored back to me, the reflection of that, I find so unappealing that I hold that resentment that I have against them. That's really what I don't like in myself, and use that as the justification to stay in these active addictions and continue in this vicious cycle of alcoholism. So that really opened my eyes, and that was definitely definitely making me want to continue on with this journey. So then the next step is, in most cases, we found that our self-esteem, our pocketbook, ambition, personal relationships, sex, security, pride was affected. So now I had to look at how I was affected. So I looked at that. It just more, not only did I look at that, I looked at how did it cause me to act? How did I act as a result of the way these things were making me feel? what actions did I take and how did it affect the other people? And then of course, you know, I got to the, oh yeah, I don't want to miss this part. This was one of the most powerful parts. So, you know, on page 66, you know, he talks about anger. Once I finished my 3 columns, you know, it says it's plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility. Futility can mean death and unhappiness. And then in that next 2 paragraphs, it mentions anger, death 7 times. You know, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. And with us to drink is to die. If we want to live, it's the opposite of death. We have to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm are not for us, but to alcoholics, these things are poison. So, you know, he's making a real strong point that anger and resentment, it has to be eliminated. So, I had to change my perspective on these people. I had to stop being angry at them. So what he had me do is, like, on the next page, it talks about the sick man prayer. So what I did is he had me visualize someone I knew that was sick and dying, and that was easy. My grandmother, I sat next to her on her deathbed, and I had clearly had that visual image in my mind. And he said, think about her, and then take each person off that list and replace your grandma with them. And then say that sick man prayer. We asked God to help show me the same tolerance, pity, and patience that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. And then, you know, I asked God to show me how I can take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every person on that list. And as I said that prayer for each person on that list, over 300 names, I just, wow, my whole world opened up. I had a whole new perspective. Like, I really felt a deep sense of empathy and compassion for each and every person on that list. The resentment vanished. I just, you know, I was clear. And then I did my turnaround. You know, I had to look at it from a completely different perspective. I looked, you know, I left the back page of every person I had a resentment for blank so that I could go in and see where I was at fault. You know, I wrote I wrote everything, the 5 questions: where had I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, etc., on each and every one of them. And that was another massive change of perspective. I'm like, wow, I look at what I did to these people. I'm holding on to these stupid little resentments that are all based on myself anyway. And meanwhile, I hurt them in all these horrible ways. And then I looked at my fear inventory. I listed them all out. You know, I can't remember, 100 something. And then he had me categorize them into 12 basic fears: death, the unknown, abandonment, rejection, failure, success, etc. He showed me that all of the fears could be boiled down to, you know, this certain 12. So I did that. And then on ironically enough, page 69, the sex inventory, I didn't list names. I didn't, you know, it wasn't a list. You know, I didn't write a list of every person I'd been with and every kinky thing we'd done. I just looked at the conduct. I looked at the conduct and how that was out of alignment with who I wanted to become as a person. You know, that was a section before I mentioned where I'd been selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate, etc. The last question, what should we have done instead? That was the catalyst for making my sex ideal. And, you know, when I made my sex ideal, it actually had very little to do with actual sex. It was an ideal for living, how to interact with other human beings in this world, because I'd seen the wreckage and carnage that I'd created through my various different addictions and alcoholism. So I need to start living in a different way. So this was an ideal for living. It wasn't an ideal for sex. You know, I let God show me in each and every circumstance how to deal with sex problems. And then page 72, into action, you know, it's time to do my 5th step. So I'd done obviously a thorough 4-step, had 300 plus names. So my 5th step took a while. My sponsor's a truck driver, so he's driving down the road listening to my 4-step on many occasions for hours at a time. And you know, fortunately for me, he'd pretty much done everything I'd done, which was reassuring. And I'll never forget at the very end of it, you know, he thought he had hung up the phone, and there was this exasperated gasp. I'm like, okay, that was a therapist. I exhausted my sponsor. But yeah, so, and then, I followed the instructions for 6, 7, 8. I went home, I got quiet for an hour. I reviewed the work. I thank God that I'd known him better. I took down the book. I looked at the first 5 proposals. I asked God if I omitted anything. And then, I had to look to see if I was willing. I prayed. If I wasn't, I had to pray for the willingness to have these character defects removed. And then I said my 7-step prayer. And that's where it closes with an amen. So that body of work, 4 through 7 was complete. So now it was time to really get real and make an 8-step list. It goes straight into the 8-step. There's no pause there, right? We go right into making an 8-step list. Fortunately, I had the 4-step inventory to draw from. I just looked at that, and my sponsor really told me to focus on the harm. Where has harm been done? Because I wanted to go say sorry to everyone. I think you're a jerk. Sorry. No, you don't do that. You do an amends when harm is caused. And my sponsor really helped me to see where I had harmed people. So I whittled my list down to, a fraction of that. And I started cracking into it. And this is where things really started to happen for me. This is where the spiritual experience became the most vivid and the most real. And it was through my amends process that 6 and 7 started to take place. Because during my inventory, I was struggling with food. I was eating a lot of bad food, and I was drinking a lot of coffee, and I was all jittery because I was dredging up the past. I was facing some difficult things. I was looking at some things I was trying to avoid. So I had to act out in some way, or so I thought. But once I got into my amends, that stuff started slipping away. My food got into alignment. I quit drinking coffee. And I had some really powerful 9-step experiences. I had the opportunity to do an amends with my father, because I live in Bali, Indonesia, and I hadn't been back to the US for quite a number of years because of COVID and everything else. And I got to go back and visit my family. And on that trip, I was able to do an amends with almost everyone on that list. And when I went to get to see my father, he was a man who had introduced me to the program Alcoholics Anonymous, but unfortunately it didn't work for him. He attended meetings, but I told you, even while he was in AA, he ended up on pills and ended up in prison. And, a few years prior to my amends, he thought he could drink. And I remember I would talk to him on the phone. He'd be like, you know what? I can have a few beers every now and then. I just don't think I'm an alcoholic anymore. I'm like, wow, like you cracked the code. That's amazing. You're one of the first in history. And when I went to see him, he was telling me too. He was telling me, he was like, I was sitting in the room with him, and he was telling me, I just have a couple beers, 2-3 times a week. I'm like, oh, I don't know how you did that. And he's like within minutes of me being there, he's like, just hold on 1 second. I'm like, wait, where are you going? And I followed him across the street to the Circle K, and he went and he grabbed a 12-pack of Budweiser and just started sculling one after another, just chugging them. And I'm like, oh, he was just so under the veil of delusion of alcoholism. But I fortunately had the opportunity to be there and love him and be compassionate and recognize that he was a sick person and pray for him and do an amends with him. And I felt so moved that I had that opportunity to do that, because it was less than 6 months later he passed away. He had a heart attack and some other health related issues, and he passed away. But I was so glad that I had that time with him and was able to do that amends and was able to tell him that I loved him one last time. And then I had another really powerful amends, and this is kind of a crazy one. I'm running out of time, so I'll wrap it up real quick. My ex-wife was Hindu, and 2 people in her family, her grandmother was a holy woman at one of the temples here. And I found out that 2 people in her family had put magic on me. So the holy woman had passed away. So I wrote a letter for an amends, and I went out into the yard and I burnt it with some other, with this little temple that they used to pray at and all this stuff. And, I just wanted to get that stuff out of my house. And I burnt it. I put a little gas on it. I burnt it, and I put a little too much gas on. And as I was praying and doing this fireball, I dropped this match on, and this fireball blew up. And I was in the middle of this fireball. I thought, I'm dead again. I thought, it's back to the blizzard situation. I'm dead again. I'm in the middle of a fireball. And then it just evaporated as quick as it was there. And that night, I had the best sleep you could imagine. And I woke up the next day feeling refreshed. I went into a meditation. I had this incredible spiritual experience where, I felt like I was this white light at one with the whole universe. Like, it was powerful. And I wanted to talk about 12, but I'm already out of time. Can I wrap up with 1 minute of the 12 step? Okay. So, up to this point, people would come up to me because I was 24 years sober and 12 years in recovery. People would come up to me like, "Hey, can you sponsor me?" I'd be, I don't know. I can get you started, but we should probably find you another sponsor pretty quickly after that, because I didn't have a solution. Once I found this big book step study solution, I knew I had the solution. And now I sponsor 6 guys, and I'm just carrying this message and living this life and experiencing these promises and miracles on a daily basis. Like, this is the way out of any addiction, alcoholism. It solves all of our problems. And I will never do anything else other than this method of working the big book. And I see my sponsees starting to sponsor other people. And, we've got, it's nice to see a small contingent of our Southeast Asia fellowship in this meeting today. We've taken hold here in Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines, Thailand. We're all over Southeast Asia now. And I feel incredibly blessed to have been part of this and to be carrying this message. And I wanted to thank you again, Eric, for letting me share. And with that, I will pass. Sorry, I ran over a little bit.